Hello everyone, my name's Giselle, and when I was first starting out art, maybe a year or so into it, I became super enamored with the idea of improvement. I'd constantly Google and look up YouTube videos and Pinterest guides and read art books, all of that crazy stuff, trying to find someone who would tell me specifically what I had to do to improve. Very frequently, the answer I found was just practice more, or some other version of practice makes perfect, which was obviously very frustrating. Sometimes I'd watch videos with advice on anatomy or coloring, or some other very practical and usually specific and measurable area within art. And I'd do the exercises and it'd help a bit, but I begun to notice that when I had bigger jumps of improvement, it felt less like I knew more of those measurable skills like anatomy and coloring, and more like I felt different, like I was seeing my drawings in a more clear way. So that obviously confused me, because it felt like practical skills weren't really what made my art any closer to what I hoped for. It was instead some intangible feeling, a shifting in the way that not only I moved my wrist to draw, but also the way I thought about my drawings entirely. I definitely can see that over time of me just purely practicing and following art tips, I did manage to improve, but I never ever felt like that was really the core of my biggest jumps in improvement, and so I don't think that art tips and pure practice are really the best way to go about it. So, after the desperate improvement phase, where I was nothing more than a progress-craving maniac, came the next phase, where, for a lot of people, including myself, you grow comfortable with a certain type of art. And even still, you probably aren't practically perfect either, because when is an artist ever perfect? But it's more or less an acceptable version of the type of art that you hope to grow into. Maybe even the type of art that you referenced and learned from in the first part of all this. And that is where the most important advice you'll ever get in art comes. For me personally, I grew into a very stylized, anime-inspired type of art. All the artists I looked up to were within that same kind of art sphere. The practice I did was in the form of repeatedly drawing in that style and criticizing myself based on my ability to adhere to that specific style. Sometimes I'd even directly compare parts of my art to the artists I aspired to, as if my closeness to their art was a measurement in quality rather than my ability to make something that did what I hoped of it. And technically speaking, I was doing things correctly. My anatomy, while not perfect, was clearly practiced, my coloring was thought out, my line art was steady, and I almost kind of got close to knowing how to draw hands. And then, like a lot of young artists, I had my little heart ripped out of my body when I was told by art teachers that my style of art, more specifically anime art, I'm doing big air quotes right now, wasn't as valuable as other styles, usually realism or some other more traditional form of art styling. I even at one point had an art teacher that told me I wasn't allowed to use pink, the color pink, in my art anymore because it doesn't appear in nature, and so it was somehow a bad color. If you've seen my art recently, you know I do not adhere to any of that advice. I love pink, and of course I love stylized art, that those same people would probably still categorize as anime, despite the fact that stylized art like that exists all over the place in other mediums. I really can't defend myself too hard though, because I was in fact inspired more by anime than any of those other mediums in question. That being said though, if their advice was worded a little kinder and less with tradition-centric intentions, it actually would have been the best possible advice I could have gotten at that point. I'll also point out that I am not someone that hates my previous art teachers. They had a curriculum to teach, and unfortunately for me it was a strict one, and from what I saw when they would occasionally show their own art, they probably also wouldn't have met the school expectations for what is real so I doubt they really held the opinions on art that they were presenting to me. When I was in my last 2 years of high school, I had for a while decided that I was not going to pursue art as a possible career at all. That wasn't just because I was struggling to enjoy art as a class, but also because my self-confidence was just generally beat up to a pulp. But because of this, I decided to draw in a way that was purely fun. I still loved the look of more anime-leaning art, although I would have been furious to hear anyone else refer to it that way. But I didn't really care about drawing in a way that felt super idealized anymore. I wasn't trying to make the perfect art in the perfect art style that encapsulated what I wanted my art to be and be known for. I was instead just drawing comfortably, and that for me came out in a much more cartoonish version of my previous art. The heads and feet grew hugely exaggerated, the faces and anatomy simplified, and the colouring turned pretty minimal. I also at some point started using the line art pen that I now use constantly in everything I make ever. And strangely enough, drawing in a way that was so new and different than what I'd been doing for at that point 6 years allowed for the biggest bridge of improvement I ever crossed in my art, like to this day. I found a point I was comfortable with, the cartoonish art style, and with that style I was able to create drawings that, while not super masterful or perfect or anything like that, were much more capable at showcasing what I had in my head going into each drawing. I wasn't worried about anatomy as much, and so I was much more comfortable doing more interesting poses. The lighting was minimal, and so I felt much more comfortable experimenting with colours. Of course, my art slowly, piece by piece, ended up turning back into a more anime-reminiscent art style, but that was as slowly as I was comfortable. I did not force myself to draw in my end goal art style, or even an art style I considered my own at all. Instead, I drew comfortably and slowly, what I was comfortable with, and naturally progressed toward the kind of art I'd always hoped to make, now reinformed by things I only learnt by drawing in a more simplified art style. The point of this video, however, is not that everyone should draw cartoons for a bit. What I truly believe is that you should draw in a way that is entirely different than your preferred style of art. If you draw cartoons, draw realism. If you paint, use charcoal. If you make music, write a story. I think the most beautiful art I've seen, heard, and read in my life is always able to reach the level it does because of the unique qualities it draws to a medium that has otherwise very rarely reached them. It is absolutely true that you will never be better than someone else at their own style of art. That is the nature of stylization. But on top of that, it is very difficult, at least in my opinion, to learn the smaller, less noticeable parts of a type of art without first learning the bigger, more obvious depictions of those parts in other artwork. Posing is such a huge example of that. It is much easier to learn exaggerated poses and then contort that to a more, subtle art style than it is to watch as others draw subtle movement in their work and practice that without ever really understanding the movement at its most exaggerate form. Aside from the actual technical side of things, this was also helpful to me because it helped me deal with a negative feeling I think a lot of people have with their art. I'm going to start this by saying that not all artists are mentally unwell or hurt in some major way, and it isn't a requirement that you have to suffer to make good art. Of course, it is somewhat more common than it should be that artists are struggling with mental issues, but what I mean is if you are, as an artist listening to this, never ever suffered anything, you would still be just as talented. For me personally, I was initially drawn to art like a lot of loser kids were because I wanted to draw characters I liked. But the reason I continued with it was because as I got older and better at drawing, I grew a very strong and very insatiable desire to perfectly explain myself through my drawings. I wanted my characters to be perfect representations of what I felt. I wanted the worlds I wrote to reflect my own. I wanted to create something that in its entirety, not excluding any detail or stylistic choice, explained everything I wanted to be understood. But that's not how art works. Doing what other artists that you hope to replicate do will only allow you to express their feelings and hope that your own show up somewhere in between. I promise that you are not perfectly explainable by a singular other person's art, and if you allow yourself to take the risk of digging at something that feels completely unlike you, you will have a much better time expressing yourself. I feel like online, especially now, we are becoming too enclosed in a cycle of retelling and redrawing the same feelings because we refuse to take the risk of experimenting in a way that might allow us to more accurately portray something new. I'm not going to give specific examples because I think that'd be rude to do publicly about something that isn't that serious, but I truly do not believe it is possible that all of us just happen to be feeling sadness and love and longing in the same way that can be fully explained by the same metaphor. I think exploring outside of what you idolize is, in my opinion, the biggest key to expressing yourself in a way that is accurate to you personally, instead of just a regurgitation of other people's innermost feelings. I think, overall, the way I would phrase the point of this video, the best art advice or best art tip, depending on how I title this, is that the best way to feel satisfied and stable by your own work is to first explore as many other directions as possible, especially those that are entirely opposing to your own, and like the people you look up to. Okay, that's the end of this video. This video was a bit more personally focused than most of my others, so I'm not sure what the feeling will be towards that, but I hope that this advice helps you. I've been really moved to see whenever I've posted advice videos in the past when people tell me that I actually helped somehow. I think with something as personal as art, it is easy to second guess the things that you think you know. So, I don't know, I really appreciate that my feelings about art are able to resonate with other people in that way. Okay, try not to be awkward. Bye!